introduce our fourth finalist group. This is Brad Fuller and Duje Grubisic. Thank you. I knew I wasn't going to say that right. And they worked with Professor Andrew Grminalda on a project entitled Is Inventory a Worthy Indicator of Business Cycles?
Hello, I'm Brad Fuller, and this is my partner,
Duje Grubisic.
Before we begin, we would like to thank Professor Grminalda and his help in being a mentor for us. So, the title of our research is Inventory a Worthy Indicator of Business Cycles? Before we dive into the content of our project, we would like to give you an economic crash course that we entitle Economic for Dummies. To understand economics, you need to first understand GDP. GDP is the gross domestic product, which is the total production of the nation as a whole. And it also measures the health of the economy. The government has two agencies that analyzes GDP and forecasts GDP. The agency that analyzes is the National Bureau of Economic Research. And the agency that forecasts GDP is the Conference Board. Now, why do we analyze and why do we forecast? It's important to know what the GDP has been doing, and it's also important to plan ahead, so we can plan ahead our financials as a nation. And of course, the economics affects the government, businesses, investors, and most importantly, us, the consumer. Now that you know a little bit about economics, we're going to talk about what we discovered in our project. Now, what we discovered is inventory is no longer a worthy indicator to predict GDP. Now, we're going to explain that later, but the Conference Board used inventory as one of their indicators to help them predict or forecast the GDP. Now, the government is using what we say a wrong indicator that could be improperly forecasting. In this picture, it kind of shows like the government kind of playing with our money. We want to make sure they're playing with it the right way and forecasting for the GDP the right way.
Now, before we explain these two statements and go into what our research was about, let's go a little bit back in time. Before any technologies were ever evolved into the United States business and inventory management techniques, inventory had a high volatility, meaning that sometimes it had too much inventory, which was called as excess inventory, or too little inventory, which is called inventory shortage. Now, over here you can see excess inventory is causing layoffs, meaning that there's no more need for production, no more need for jobs for people that are getting laid off. They're not getting paid. They're not going to spend money. No money in the system means the economy is going down. Inventory shortage over here, on the other hand, is when we are in need of new production. There's more job opportunities. People are getting paychecks. They're spending more money. We have economic upturn. In some researches that have been done in 1990s, like Metzler, Blender, Mancini, Stern, and Halpern, said that inventory investments is pro-cyclical and contributes to volatility of GDP, which means that they show that there's a correlation between levels of inventory going up or down, as well as GDP going up or down. The most important is Stern and Halpern, whose model we actually replicated and used in our research. What Stern and Halpern did is they used Series 92 data, which is unfilled durable goods, another name, inventory, and they replicated it to show that there is an actual correlation between it going up or down with the GDP. Now, what we did, we took data from 2000 to 2010, replicated it, and showed that there's no correlation between, but a little bit more about that later. Now, there's been a transformation of inventory management in the early 1980s when there was introduction of just-in-time inventory system, which was introduced by Japanese in 1970s and came to the United States in 1980s. Now, one of the researchers in 2000 was Hung, Murray, and Owen that showed us how technology is already affecting the levels of inventory in the United States. And it showed us that from 1981 to 2000, inventory holdings went down from 96 to 81 days.
In this graph right here complements Stern and Halpern's model, saying that inventory does have a predictability power. Now, in November 2001, we hit a trough which was declared by the National Bureau of Economic Research. The blue is the GDP, and the red is the inventory. We hit our trough right here in November 2001 for GDP. As you can see, for inventory, we start hitting it 3 to 4 months in advance, saying that we could predict or help forecast what the GDP is going to do.
But after all these technologies and after all the businesses having implemented just-in-time inventory in early and mid-2000s and introduction of internet, GPS, and satellites, we have seen that inventory levels don't have as big a volatility as they used to before the introduction of technology. Now, what this means for businesses and United States economy is that businesses don't have to spend as much money on holding the inventory, and also they're more efficient. So they're not holding maximum inventory in there. Some of the researches that have happened since 2000 to 2010 were Stock and Boston Seams, and McConnell and Perez-Queiroz, and they brought up a theory that actually inventory is no longer a leading indicator of GDP, but it's a lagging indicator. And our research, but they didn't replicate the Stern and Hopper model. However, we were, I believe, the first ones that did it, and we replicated that model, and it put a final dot onto the theory that inventory is no longer a leading indicator of GDP, it's a lagging indicator.
So Duje just mentioned what our report is about. Inventory is no longer a leading indicator of GDP, rather it is a lagging indicator. The conference board has 10 indicators that they use, and inventory is one of the most important. So we believe that they're using an indicator that is not important now due to technology changes like just-in-time inventory and like the internet. Communication is easier now with companies. They're able to maintain their inventory levels at more efficient levels, and they're saving the company more money. And our regression analysis helps show this. We showed a strong correlation with current GDP and current inventory levels. However, with our lags, we showed a very weak correlation, meaning that inventory levels have no predictability power. Here's a graph that helps show this. In 2007, in December 2007, the National Bureau of Economic Research declared a peak, right here. And as you look up the inventory levels, we hit the peak at the exact same time, showing there's no predictability power. Rather, they're actually now moving together. So Duje is going to explain, like, what do we suggest? Where do we go from here?
Now, what we suggest is that inventory is no longer being used as a leading indicator of the economy. Also, should we put the inventory out of the equation, or should we probably find some new way of determining how it affects the GDP? And also, if we found a glitch, a mistake in one of the indicators, should we test all other 9 to decide if technology has more than enough impact to hurt the other 9 indicators of the economy?
Who does this affect? It affects all of us. There's this big giant circle that goes around, affects the government, the businesses, investors, and consumers. But most importantly, it affects us. It affects how much we're paying for our products. It affects if we're going to go out Saturday night to the movies. You know, it's important that the government is forecasting properly and using the proper tools so that our finances remain as best as they can be. That was our project, and thank you very much for your time.
Thank you.
Questions for our group? Paul?
Anywhere in your study did you factor in the concept of supply and demand?
That supply and demand was the actual graph that I showed. Go back a little bit. So when there's a excess inventory, means that supply went over the demand, right? So you need to get rid of it. If a demand is over supply, then you have a shortage of inventory.
If not inventory, what do you suggest as a
Well, we haven't covered that in our research, but what we can say is that they can maybe examine. We don't know what can be maybe put into the equation of calculating the GDP, but maybe they just need to find a new way of calculating it.
When they, for the indicators, they use like average weekly hours for manufacturing. They use the money supply into. That's just some of the things, and then they have 10 that they use, but those are just some of the things they use. And we just suggest maybe re-looking at these, but definitely inventory is no longer an indicator.
Since you guys know that inventory is no longer a factor that should be used, did you try recalculating the GDP without it?
No, we didn't try to, because it would be an extent research. It would probably take us 6 more months to do it. to finding the data of the other things and then putting it in and trying to get the GDP, it will probably take us a little bit more long. This way we're just getting the heads up to the government, I don't know, people, getting the people aware that there's a little mistake, kind of big mistake happening, and people are losing money probably because of it.
What is the general consensus as to how successful the government is on predicting GDP? And are there private institutions that attempt to predict GDP for their specific investors? And do they have other proposals on that?
You want to try that one?
Restate that.
What's the general consensus as to how good the government is? Is it good GDP? Are they positively guiding the economy in their predictive power? And have there been private attempts made at predicting GDP and have them all
Well, yeah, the conference board is their job is forecasting. But we mentioned in one of the papers, Stock Watson. They had 3 things that they suggested that was going on with the GDP, and they said one of them was that like the Federal Reserve is doing better with like issuing money, and with their the government's just doing better with their monetary and physical policy and being more efficient with that.
What he's trying to say, government so far thinks that they're doing a good job, but they needed someone to find out that they're not. Maybe this is a step, I don't know. However, yeah, obviously there's going to be always financial institutions that want the GDP being better. They're going to research it, but it doesn't mean that the government is always going to listen to you. They have to hire you probably first, and then you have to make a really good argument in telling them they're doing wrong. So.
Do you know how large of a percentage that inventory goes into in the formula for calculating?
It's one top 3 indicators as of right now.
Any other questions for our finalists?
That's it.
Let's thank our group.